that it's about to end. It's been 42 years now, and it doesn't seem to end. So how come that Israelis live with it, with no moral questions, with no doubts whatsoever about it? And the answer is very simple. It took me some years to get to it. We were taught to think, we were trained to think that we are very moral and we keep human rights. There is only one problem. The Palestinians are not human beings, or at least not human beings like us. This dehumanization, which is a systematic process for decades, is the only tool which enables us Israelis to maintain the occupation and to feel so good about ourselves. And this dehumanization is really wall-to-wall in the Israeli society. Even the so-called leftists and the peaceniks, when you scratch a little bit, you will find that they don't perceive the Palestinians as equal human beings. And the media is playing an enormous role. And I will give only one example, John, and then I'll shut up. In Kasle, there were 2 dogs killed. One in a villa in Ashkelon, which is a southern town not far from Gaza, and the other dog was killed with the troops in Gaza, both in 2 different days. Both dogs got front page coverage in the Israeli popular newspapers, with pictures of the funeral, with talking to their owners, telling how wonderful those dogs were. In the very same days that those 2 dogs were killed, there were obviously tens of Palestinians killed, if not hundreds. This was mentioned in page 15, page 16, 1 column, hardly a title, no image, no names, nothing. And what is the message to the Israeli reader? The 2 Israeli dogs' lives are worth more than hundreds of Palestinians. This is just an example to the way that Israelis are being taught, to the systematic brainwash system which teaches us again and again that A, we are moral, B, that we are the victims, and not only the victims, but the only victims, the ultimate victims around, and C, that what we are doing for so many years to another people is acceptable, is inevitable, and can be done by the most moral army in the world. Thank you.
But Gideon, your paper is published, people read it, people talk about it, it plays a prominent role in Israeli discourse, and yet you say that the dehumanization of Palestinians has in some way completely neutralized all questioning. Does this add up entirely? Surely there are really still significant numbers of Israelis who think as you do.
In the year of 82, there was the massacre in Sabra and Shatila, which was not done directly by Israel. There were 400,000 Israelis in the city center protesting against this massacre. If this would have happened today, there wouldn't be 400 Israelis showing up. Something happened to the Israeli society. Something very bad. It got into a condition of coma.
But let me interrupt for a moment. I mean,
sure.
Here is a system of government which is a proportional representation, slightly shambolic. We never think of it as a particularly powerful system. So where is this dehumanization being fed from? Who's doing it?
That's the problem, that it's not being directed or dictated from above. There is hardly censorship in Israel. The Israeli media is professional and liberal and open-minded and free. The problem is of self-censorship. The problem is of not understanding the role of journalism. The problem is that we think we have just to please our readers and not to bother them. And getting back directly to your question, Haaretz has influence, is a mainstream newspaper, but it's really an island. And we know how bad it goes for print in general all over the world. And we know also that Haaretz is as influential as it was and still is. It's quite a small readership. And even in Haaretz, whenever I go to prepare myself an espresso, John, I open the closet where they keep those capsules for the espresso, and there is a file there. And it always strikes me when I see it, and it's getting bigger and bigger. And you know what's written on this file? Gideon Levy, cancellations of subscriptions. And it's getting bigger. By this, I don't want to say that there is not a readership for Haaretz, that there is not a different Israeli voice, but it's being marginalized recently, delegitimized. You remember maybe the days in which we used to say that two Israelis share three views. Today, unfortunately, three Israelis hardly share one view. And Haaretz is struggling, and Haaretz is different, and Haaretz is a different voice, and Haaretz gives me this full freedom. Because Haaretz does not agree to all my views. I mean, I don't represent Haaretz necessarily. But Haaretz as a liberal newspaper, we had even a British editor, David Landau, an Orthodox, who was so liberal to let me write really with full freedom. But Haaretz is just an island, and an island which is losing some of its influence, and it's really against all the rest, and the rest is in an entire different place.
You say the file is expanding of cancelled subscriptions. You also said right at the beginning that you felt that the Gaza moment had really turned opinion in Europe, and you felt it was possibly beginning to turn opinion in America. This morning I turned on the radio, and the first item I heard was that the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is one of the most influential and largest investment groups in the world, had cancelled investments in two Israeli construction companies. How serious do you really think that the turning of opinion against Israel really is?
First of all, I don't want to call it against Israel, because in many ways it's in favor of Israel. At least part of it. Look, first of all, there is a big gap between governments and public opinions in Europe. I hope this gap will be overbridged, but right now there is still a gap. Most of the governments in Europe are still quite pro-Israeli, and when I mean pro-Israeli, I mean also pro-occupation. Look how the EU is participating in the siege on Gaza. Look how they are participating in the stupid boycott of Hamas. They collaborate with anything that Washington and Jerusalem are agreeing upon. But the public opinions are changing. Now it leads to the question of the sanctions. And here, if you would let me, I want to elaborate a few sentences, because I'm always asked about the sanctions. First of all, me as an Israeli who does not boycott Israel, I can't call others to boycott Israel. I don't boycott Israel. I live in Israel, and I don't boycott it. And it is my choice. Now, the question of boycott is not if it's a legitimate weapon. It is a legitimate weapon. Israel is using it a lot. What is the siege on Gaza if not a boycott? What is the boycott on Hamas if not a boycott? What is the call to the world to boycott and to put sanctions on Iran if not boycott? Boycott is a legitimate weapon. The only question is it effective or not? Because it's not a goal, it's a tool. And the question is, would the Israelis make the connection between the price and the reason, when there are so many agencies who help them to believe there is no connection? When there are so many agencies who will help them to explain that Norway, for example, is an old anti-Semitic state. And this will be the reaction. Until now, any pressure pushed the Israeli for more nationalism. and more closeness to the world. And again, there are so many agencies which help them to think so, to feel so, that the world is anyhow against us, no matter what we do. So why would we care? On the other hand, I understand the need. It's also need of people like me who know that the change will not come from within the Israeli society. People like me are calling the world to do something to save Israel from its own hands. So I leave it open because I really don't know what effect will it have. Israelis until now didn't pay any price for the occupation. This must be said. Life in Israel is wonderful. One of the reasons why they wouldn't care about the occupation is that why to go for a change when life is so good? Tel Aviv is one of the most amazing cities in the world. Vivid, day and night, wealthy. Why should someone bother about evacuating settlements? Who needs this headache, this hassle? What for when life is so good? So the question is, would people make the connection? Would they say, oh, if the Norwegians are boycotting Israel, we should give another thought about what we are doing? Until now it didn't happen. Hopefully it will happen, but I can't guarantee it.
Let's turn to questions.